Hi, my name is Donald Barclay, and this is my little presentation, The University of California, Merced, an informal history of its early years. And I began working for UC Merced in September of 2002. I was hired as an assistant university librarian. I was eventually associate university librarian, deputy university librarian. I was university librarian for 4 years, and I ended up working for UC Merced for 20 years until I retired. So I was there when a lot of the early history was happening of the campus. And this is my very idiosyncratic, one sided history of those early years. The story as I know it, and other people probably have different stories, and that's the way history works. But this is my story, and I'm sticking to it, as the saying goes. So, all the UCs have their history. UC Berkeley, this is a photo of Berkeley campus, a little less than 30 years after its founding. This is UC San Francisco, which started up on Parnassus Hill in San Francisco as a private medical school and eventually became part of the University of California. Davis, of course, started as the farm and then became its own campus. UCLA started in downtown LA as a normal school, a teacher's college, and eventually in the 20s it moved out to Westwood. And in very typical UCLA Hollywood fashion, they have a glamorous young woman out there showing off their construction of their site. Santa Barbara also started as the normal school and then became a UC. Riverside started as the Citrus Experiment Station and then eventually became a full-fledged UC in the 50s. And then you had the three campuses that were founded in the 1960s, pretty much from scratch. UC San Diego, which was sited on the site of a former U.S. Marine Corps base, and then was affiliated with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography. This is a photo of UC Santa Cruz's founding chancellor. His name was Dean McHenry. Dean was his first name, not his title. And this photo was kind of famous because it was published in Time magazine of him sitting out on his desk out in the middle of the rolling hills of Santa Cruz. This is a photo of UC Irvine under construction, and certainly any self-respecting, red-blooded California car enthusiast would kill to have any of those vehicles shown in this photo in their collection in the fairly pristine condition they're shown here. So the three campuses that were built in the 60s were a result of the master plan for higher education in California. And this plan was developed with the recognition that California was growing in population, and that because of the baby boom, which started in 46, there were going to be a lot of people in the pipeline, young people who were going to want to pursue higher education. And so the master plan called for the community college system, which today I think there are 110 two-year community colleges in California. Then the CSU system, which are mostly four-year degree-granting institutions with a lot of emphasis on teacher education, although they have other degrees, of course, and they offer master's degrees in many areas and doctorates in education. And then the UCs, which are the University of California campuses, which are the research arm of California higher education, which offer bachelor's, master's, and doctorate degrees in many subject areas, and also medical degrees through their medical campuses, and law degrees. So the master plan was created with this growth in higher education that was going on starting in the post-war era. In 1944, you have the passage of the Servicemen's Readjustment Act of 1944, popularly known as the GI Bill, which allowed a lot of people to go to school post-war whose education had been delayed due to the economic constraints of the Depression, but also because of 4 years of war, they weren't able to go to school. So the federal government and the state government started investing more and more money into higher education, which meant building more campuses, creating more space for students to pursue higher education, more opportunity. And it peaked out around 1964. And 1964 was an important year because that was the year that the first of the baby boomers started their four-year college careers. And the baby boomers had their four-year college careers from 1964 to about 1986. Those were the peak four-year college-going years for the baby boomers. So you can see there's a fairly steady investment in higher education, and then it ticked up again somewhat in the 80s. So the planning of higher education in California was very much in tune with what was going on with the population and spending in higher education. So the master plan called for a campus to be built in the Central Valley. It actually called for 3 more campuses to be built, but one of these would be in the Central Valley. And this person here, Leo Collegian, was a Fresno attorney and businessman who was also on the Board of Regents. And Leo was very active in the Fresno community. He was active in the Armenian community in Fresno. And he was in the Board of Regents. He became president of the Board of Regents. And as president, he pushed for a campus to be built in the Central Valley for the promise of the master plan to be pushed through for the Central Valley. And Leo was pretty agnostic, even though he was from Fresno. He was agnostic about where the campus would go, as long as it was in the Fresno Valley, or in the Central Valley, not necessarily in Fresno. So some interesting stories about Leo. If you were a baby boomer, you're old enough to remember a television program called Mannix about a private detective. And the star of Mannix was an actor named Mike Connors. But Mike Connors' birth name was not Mike Connors. It was Gregor Krikorian. He was an Armenian. And I'm sorry, his name was Krekor Orhanian. I said his name wrong. Krekor Orhanian was his Armenian birth name. Anyway, he was Leo's brother-in-law, Leo Collegian's brother-in-law. So Leo got involved in show business through his brother-in-law, and he was kind of a business manager for Mike Connors, helped his career. And he got involved with other aspects of show business. And the story that Leo told me years ago, and Leo passed away several years ago, sadly, of cancer, but the story Leo told me was a Hollywood agent reached out to Leo and said, hey, there's this actor I want you to meet. I think he's got some potential, and he's looking for someone to support him over the next 5 years so that he can make his way in Hollywood. And the deal is, any money he makes as an actor, he'll split with his sponsor for the rest of his career as an actor. And so Leo met this guy, and he was really impressed with him. He thought he really had some potential, and Leo sent him to an acting coach. And the acting coach met the actor, and he reported back to Leo, and he said, save your money. This guy's never going to make it in Hollywood. And the reason that the agent or the acting coach thought that the actor wasn't going to make it in Hollywood was that the actor had a very strong Austrian accent. So Leo said not investing in Arnold Schwarzenegger's acting career was the worst business decision he ever made. So again, a story about Leo, who was a real character. So moving along here, the people in this photo are Chris Adams, who in the 80s and early 90s was working for the Office of the President, University of California, Office of the President, in the planning office, and Karen Merritt, who also worked for the Office of the President. And Chris eventually became the first campus architect of UC Merced and led the campus through the building of the initial buildings and beyond. And if you've ever heard of people at UC Merced talking about the Merritt Writing Program, which is the name of the campus writing program, it was named after Karen Merritt, who was by profession an English professor, but at this time was working for the Office of the President in the 80s. And the two of them were assigned the job of going around the Central Valley and scouting out potential locations for a campus. And so they carried binoculars and a bird book with them because they didn't want people to know who they actually were. But people figured it out anyway. And some people were quite delighted that they were looking at their property with dollar signs in their eyes, thinking they were going to sell their property to the University of California for big bucks. But they also said that they'd be out looking, and sometimes landowners would pull up next to them and tell them in not quite so many words, get the heck out of here. I am never going to sell my land to the University of California, maybe with some other words thrown in. So they didn't keep their secret completely. But they scouted the valley and they identified something like 84 potential sites, many of which were not really feasible, but they were possible sites. And this number was fairly quickly pared down from 80 to 30 to 15 um, to a much smaller number. And the communities that were in the running for the site were quickly, judging their chances. And the people in Fresno thought that Fresno or close to Fresno and Madera um, were going to be the likely sites for the campus, that they saw themselves as the front runners. But this is an article in the Fresno Bee, and the Fresno Bee was pretty much biased in favor of a Fresno site. But this article in the Fresno Bee said Merced may be the toughest rival for a UC campus, basically saying don't count your chickens before they're hatched, Fresno. And the sentence I highlighted in the bottom there is really interesting. The first of 3 new campuses is expected to open in 1998, followed by a second campus in 99 and a third campus the following year. Well, obviously, UC Merced didn't open until 2005, 7 years later, after 1998, and there's never been a second or third campus, and there's no plans for a second or third campus in the books anywhere. So a little bit of wishful thinking there. This is an article from the LA Times in 1990, and the first paragraph reads, Fresno, on an immense dusty pasture about 7 miles north of Merced, community activist Bob Carpenter envisions classrooms, dormitories, a library, and a gym. Now, Bob Carpenter, some people call him the father of UC Merced. Maybe he was the George Washington of UC Merced, but he was the person in the community who really lit a fire in the community and got a bunch of other people to form the University Committee of Merced, which is a group of people who took it on their own without any official sanction from anybody to say, we're going to try to get this campus here in Merced. And you need to understand that the Castle Air Base officially closed completely in 1995 and had been winding down for several years before that. So this big economic engine for the county was gone. And there was a real void left. And so these community leaders who are memorialized in a plaque that's on campus, and these are the leaders right here, their names, they took it on themselves, saying, maybe we can get this campus here. We've got a lot going for us. And they took the tactic of reaching out to members of the UC Board of Regents, the group that was going to vote on where the campus would be, and they worked on getting these university regents to believe that Merced was the site for the campus. And they worked for a long time, and they worked very diligently, and they raised money, and a lot of people in the community contributed money, and they were essential in bringing the campus here. And if you are familiar with Merced County, a lot of these names are very familiar to you. A lot of them, thankfully, are still with us. Some of them are no longer with us, sadly. But these are the people who really worked hard to bring the campus here. Now, they had some advantages. Merced had water, and Merced had the Virginia Smith Trust, a 7,000-acre tract of land that was being held in trust and was, at the time the campus was being considered, the site was being looked for, was overseen by a board of directors, and it was the board of directors for the Virginia Smith Trust also was the board of directors for the Merced County Office of Education, because the idea of the trust was that one way or another the trust lands were going to support education in Merced County. And the vision of the original Merced UC committee was that the trust lands were going to be used in such a way that they would be a site for the campus, but also generate so much income from development that they were going to be able to fund tuition for every Merced County student who wanted to pursue higher education in any form, vocational, 2-year, 4-year, beyond, that their tuition could be paid for out of Smith Trust funds. That was the vision. It didn't quite happen that way, unfortunately. But the Smith Trust does fund education in Merced County, for sure. But anyway, Merced had this going for it. That was the big draw. They had water, they had land. And the land was under one ownership, as opposed to a lot of these sites were multiple owners that were going to have to be basically bought out, and all of them were going to have to agree to sell. And that makes for some very tricky land deals. Now, there were ups and downs along the way. And there were hard times, economic hard times, when UC or the state would say, we're never going to build this campus, forget about it. But the committee persisted in spite of hard times. And it all led up to a meeting of the Board of Regents, which was held on May 18th, 1995. Now, this is from an oral history that was collected from William B. Baker, who was University of California Vice President for Budget and University Relations. And if you know much about UC, you know that in many ways the Vice President for Budget is more powerful than the President in the UC system. It's an extremely powerful position. And the thing about Baker was he thought Merced was a terrible site for the campus. He was opposed. He was always opposed to Merced as a site. Even after it was named, he was still opposed to it. And he thought the site needed to be in Fresno County, or Madera County at least, close to Fresno, because Fresno was where the population was. So before the regents met, there was an unofficial straw poll taken in the president's office, and they voted 5-4 in favor of the Madera site. And Baker wanted the president to go into the Board of Regents meeting endorsing the Madera site, but the president refused to do that. He said, we're going to go in neutral and let the board decide. And so this meeting was held in San Francisco, and this is Baker's account. He was prepared to push for the Madera site. He had the speech ready to go, but he said we had a negative presentation by Fresno. Fresno had a site in Fresno, and they were told not to present because they were not going to be considered, but they went ahead and presented anyway. A not very competent presentation by Madera, and a superb presentation by Merced, highlighting the land, the trust, the water. I mean, they did a hell of a job. Now, this presentation was given by Bob Carpenter, who was the George Washington of UC Merced. But the presentation was created by Tim O'Neill, who was the Alexander Hamilton of UC Merced, and Tim is still in Merced, and Bob is still in Merced, and Bob, of course, was in the insurance business, and he's now retired from that. Tim still manages Image Masters, so the owner of Image Masters, an advertising and promotional company here in town. And they were the two who really drove it home at that meeting. But there was a whole busload of Merced people at this meeting, and they went into that meeting, all of them, very confident that Merced was going to get the nod because they had talked to the regents. They knew how the regents were going to vote, and they knew Merced had the votes to get the site. So even though it was up in the air in some sense, the Merced contingent was very confident. One of the reasons they were confident was because of the postcard campaign. Now, this was the idea of Larry Morse, who was the district attorney of Merced County at the time. And he had this idea of getting postcards and having school kids send the postcards to the regents. Now, the logistics of it was carried out by Roger Wood, a farmer here, an agriculturist here in Merced County. And Roger acquired thousands of postcards, got stamps on them, bundled them up, distributed them to teachers, and they were addressed to various regents, but the students were not told what to write, but they were told, the idea was to try to bring a campus here and to write to the regents telling them why you want a campus, if you want a campus in Merced County. And the students filled out these postcards and they were sent to the regents, and those regents were flooded with postcards from young people in the county saying, we want the campus here. And it was very persuasive. Now, a story about Roger. Roger was a farmer in Merced County, and his family had a very successful orchard and also a packing and shipping business in Atwater. Roger had a master's in agriculture from UC Davis, and in the early days of promoting the campus, the community was very much in favor of the campus, except for the Farm Bureau. The Farm Bureau was worried that bringing a campus to Merced was going to do to Merced County what had happened to Santa Clara County, where agriculture was effectively wiped out by industry, the high-tech industry, and housing. And they didn't want that to happen in Merced County, and they were worried that UC would do that. So they were against the campus, but Bob had a very brilliant idea. He invited the Farm Bureau to appoint one of their members to serve on the UC Merced committee. And initially they appointed a man who was an agriculture professor at Merced College, but he didn't last very long because he moved on to another campus, and so they appointed Roger Wood. And Roger came in as a representative of the Farm Bureau, but Roger very quickly became convinced that having a UC was a good thing and became a really strong advocate, an important advocate for bringing the campus here. There's another story about Roger beside the postcards. Oops, I missed up. Oops, I'm sorry, I went the wrong way. Roger had an airplane, a twin engine. It was either a Queen Air or King Air. This is a picture of a Queen Air, and it wasn't Roger's, but it was a plane like this. And at the time of the meeting, the day of the meeting, Willie Brown, the Speaker of the Assembly, was in Sacramento, and he said, "I'll vote for Merced if you can get me to San Francisco by plane because I don't have time to drive there and drive back. I've got too much going on." So Bob Carpenter called Roger, and Roger's company had an airplane. And he said, "Hey, can you fly Willie Brown to the meeting? He's going to vote for Merced." Roger said, "Oh, there's a problem. I'm using the plane that day because I'm going to fly a farmer from Madera to the meeting, and he's going to stand up in front of the regents and say, 'Don't put the campus in Madera. We don't have enough water.'" So they worked it out where the plane went down, picked up the farmer from Madera early in the morning, flew him to San Francisco, flew to Sacramento, picked up Willie Brown, flew him to San Francisco. Willie Brown made it to the meeting maybe 20, 30 minutes after the meeting started. He sat there during the meeting. He didn't say a word. He only said one word during the meeting, and that's when they did the roll call vote, and Willie Brown said the one word, Merced. So anyway, not really to their surprise, the Merced contingent triumphed. Merced was selected as the site. The vote was 15-4. When they got back to town from the meeting later that same day, the town was going crazy. People had signs up. They were celebrating in the streets, cheering. People were really happy. This is the Merced Sun-Star the next day after the board meeting. I believe that's Tim Rosari on the cover there, that big photo. The article on the right, Regents Choose Merced, that's a photo of Bob Carpenter on that article. The town was just ecstatic. A week after the meeting, they had a parade to celebrate the campus coming to Merced. This is the Merced Parents Preschool, and these kids are marching, holding up signs saying what year they're going to graduate from UC Merced. And in the center of this photo is Gina and Daryl Scherf, who are Merced County educators, and their daughter's holding up a sign saying what year she's going to graduate from UC Merced. And in fact, she did grow up and graduated from UC Merced in the year on her banner there. So it did come true for some of those students. Gina and Daryl are longtime Merced County educators, and they've both served as president of the Merced Sunrise Rotary. There are a lot of Rotarians involved in bringing the campus to Merced in various ways. Now, as happy as everybody was, there was a caveat to the campus being appointed, or being assigned to Merced. After the vote was taken, the president of the university said, "We don't have any money to build a campus, and we don't have any plans to start construction." So the committee, Bob and the other members of the committee, knew they had another job to do, which was to get the state moving and the UC moving to actually build this campus. Now, after the Merced was chosen as the site, a new issue came up, and it was an environmental issue that hadn't surfaced before. And the issue was the issue of sensitive lands, vernal pools, fairy shrimp, wildlife, birds specifically, and protecting those. So all these environmental issues surface. Now, very, very complicated stuff. It involved the University of California, it involved the state, it involved local agriculture interests, it involved the Army Corps of Engineers, it involved environmental groups, and I'm not going to go into all the gory details because it's too much to cover. There's a book to be written just about the environmental issues. But you had the Smith Trust, which was the Cyril Smith Trust and Virginia Smith Trust, and they were brother and sister. Of course, they were long deceased by the time this was happening. And they're trust lands which were set aside to support education. And originally the campus was going to be built further up in the hills, higher up above the valley floor. And the idea was the campus was going to be built on these lands up there that were kind of marginal grazing lands, and that a university community would be built around the campus, kind of wrapping around the campus. And this land would be so valuable for housing and stores and other purposes that the Smith Trust was going to generate millions and millions of dollars that would be used to fund higher education tuition for Merced County students in perpetuity. But what happened was the university ended up spending about $40 million buying conservation easements around the trust lands that would be preserved in perpetuity to preserve vernal pools. And the campus ended up being built, instead of up in the hills, it was built down in the valley, well, kind of in the hills where it is today. And there would be no university community up on the marginal hill lands, and any growth in campus in the county communities was going to happen on the valley where the agricultural lands were. Now, what happened was there was a golf course called the Merced Hills Golf Club, and this club happened to be going out of business. And so, with a grant from the Packard family, the university was able to purchase the golf course land. And that golf course land, because it was not environmentally sensitive, is where the campus was built. And that's where most of the campus sits today, on about 110 acres of land that was the Merced Hills Golf Course. And it didn't involve all of these permitting environmental issues, and the battle for that went on for a long time. And so that's why the campus is where it is. Now, there's some stories about the campus being built on the golf course. This is a picture of the academic senate marching in their regalia, and the woman in the front there is Susan Amison, who at the time this photo was taken was chair of the academic senate, and as chair she's carrying the ceremonial mace, the symbol of the authority of the campus and the faculty. And they bring out the mace for all of their formal events where they dress up in their caps and gowns, their regalia. And this mace was constructed by a local woodworker named Pope Lawrence. And Pope is the husband of Jane Lawrence, who was the first vice chancellor for student affairs for UC Merced. Pope was an avid golfer as well as a woodworker, and he played the Merced Hills Golf Course many times. And so when he constructed the mace on his lathe, that big round knob at the end has embedded in it a golf ball from the Merced Hills Golf Course. That's the story anyway. I don't know if that's true, but that's what I've heard. So that's part of the golf course legacy of the campus. Another part of the golf course legacy was sometime after the campus was opened, when Rod Park was acting chancellor. The story is Rod Park got a call from the Corps of Engineers who said, oh, there's a problem. The golf course was never actually legally permitted. It should have never been built. So you're going to have to remove all the campus buildings and restore the land to its natural state. Well, obviously, there was a compromise made. That didn't happen. But that gives you an idea of the complexity of the environmental issues that surrounded the campus and all the players involved, which included the Corps of Engineers and environmental groups and the university and the state and lots of other people, agriculturists and so on, were involved in all of this. Okay, so I mentioned I started at UC Merced in September 2nd, 2002. And this is a photo of me on the day of the founding ceremonies, October 25th, 2002. And there I am in my regalia. The photo was taken by Bruce Miller, the founding university librarian. And this is a photo of the founding ceremonies, the groundbreaking. That's Carol Tomlinson Kesey, who was the first chancellor. And not only was the founding ceremony that day, but Carol officially was invested as the chancellor on that day. Next to her is former California Governor Gray Davis. Next to him is Richard Atkinson, president of the University of California. The man next to him was the chair of the Board of Regents at the time, whose name I forget. And part of the ceremonies included local young people dressed up in ethnic costumes representing the different ethnic groups of Merced County. So there were people dressed in Sikh costume, clothing, in Hmong clothing, in various Asian groups, Filipinos, um, Dutch, Portuguese, various Hispanic cultures, African cultures, representing the different groups that that ethnic groups that make up the really diverse community of the Central Valley. It was a very impressive ceremony. And after the ceremony, there was a big party at the lake, a big barbecue that the community was invited to. They had a big tent pitched for this event where they officially broke ground. So after the groundbreaking, work got underway right away, building the campus. This is March 2003. And for a long time, those are construction trailers you see in the background there. There wasn't much happening above ground because there was so much infrastructure to build, millions and millions of dollars worth of infrastructure to be put in. So lots of work going on, but nothing to really see. This is the library's groundbreaking, the Collegiate Library. This was a little less than a year after the groundbreaking for campus. The tall gentleman, second from left there, is Bruce Miller, founding university librarian. The woman in the blue suit is, light blue suit is Carol Tomlinson Kesey. Next to her is Lindsay DeVarche, the first vice chancellor for business and finance at UC Merced. So they're breaking ground there. This is the Gala Recreation Center. So a little more than a year after groundbreaking for campus, there was steel going up. You could see things above ground. This is the Rec Center's topping off ceremony, a very traditional ceremony involving an evergreen, and the flag that using an evergreen dates back to medieval times, where the last beam is put in place with an evergreen for good luck. So here's the campus in November, a little more than a year after groundbreaking. Those buildings you see sticking up are mostly temporary construction buildings, trailers and such, temporary buildings. This is the campus water tower. I believe it was 6 million gallons, something like that, that heats and cools the campus. It still heats and cools the campus to this day. It's a very efficient way to heat and cool buildings. This is the first classroom office building going up, and it's kind of an interesting construction method because they built the pillars, the columns, and then you can see what they're doing there in the middle background. They're tilting up a wall. So what they did was they poured the concrete walls on the ground in forms, let them harden, and then they tilted them into place rather than pouring them into place vertically. They poured them in place horizontally and lifted them into place. This is a picture of the library staff in June of 2004. We did not get to go to campus very often, which was a problem. The campus was such a busy construction site that access was tightly controlled. We didn't get to go see the building very often, and that was a problem because we were the tenants and we knew what was supposed to be going in there, and very often we spotted mistakes that we could then report and get them fixed before they went too far, but we didn't get to do that very often. And there were some mistakes made because they were building so much so fast and they didn't have enough people in place to really supervise the construction. So a lot of things slid by that shouldn't have. But anyway, I call this Bruce Miller and the Five Dwarfs because Bruce was 6'5", and the rest of us on the library staff obviously were not. So from left to right, that is Jim Dooley, who was collections and technical services librarian, cataloging, things like that. Next to Jim is me. Next to me is Joy Parham. Joy was Bruce's administrative assistant, and she was actually hired before I was by Bruce. So she was the first employee of the library other than the university librarian. I was the first librarian hired. Then you have tall Bruce Miller in the middle in the orange hat. Next to him is Sarah Sheets, who's a technical services person. And next to Sarah in the white hat is Emily Lynn, who is the campus archivist. And Bruce retired in 2014. Joy retired around 2016. And then Jim, Sarah, and Emily, as of September 2003, still work for UC Merced Library. They're still working away at it, long-time employees. I retired in June of 2022 is when I retired. Okay, so here's the campus from the air. You can see the dorms are going up there in the foreground. In the background, you see the library building. And I have a little story to tell from around this time. The library was going up. It had floors. It didn't have windows. It was still open to the elements. But I was driving home from Fresno one night, and I took the Arboleda cut off to Yosemite. And I was driving down Yosemite in the dark, and I looked up, and I could see that the library had been lit up with construction lights. And I'd never seen the campus lit up before. And when you're down on the valley floor where Yosemite is and you're looking up to the campus, it's really striking with the lights on. You realize, oh my gosh, it's a campus. It is on the hill. It's up above the rest of the valley. And it was a really striking sight. And it was about 9 o'clock at night. And I drove to Bruce Miller's house and I banged on his door. I said, Bruce, get up. You got to come see this. And I got poor Bruce out of bed and drove out to Yosemite. And we spent a long time sitting there by the side of the road, just marveling at these lights up on the hill. It was really impressive. So anyway, there are the campus dorms going into place. Here's the topping off of the library, which occurred in November of 2004, more than 2 years after the groundbreaking for campus as a whole. This is the topping off of the library. That the woman with the big smile is the amazing, indefatigable Carol Tomlinson Kesey, who I think through sheer force of will forced this campus to happen and be open on time. Next to her is Leo Collegian. The woman in the red vest is Lindy DeRoche, the Vice Chancellor for Business and Finance, who was in a high level overall in charge of the construction. Next to her in the vest is Richard Schwartz, who was an architect, who was the building project manager for the library building as well as some other buildings at the same time. Way too much work for one person. Richard worked really hard, just worked his heart out, but because of the rush to get campus open and to cut corners, they gave him more than any man could do. Another one of our visits to the library, that's Emily Lynn, pointing at something that was wrong. I don't remember what was wrong, but we always found things that were wrong on our rare visits to the library. Here's a photo of them moving the windows into place. And what they would do is they would attach them to suction cups, lift them up in place with a crane, and then bolt them into place. A very ingenious way of putting windows on. Here's a beautiful picture of the campus in 2005 with a rainbow, a symbol of hope. The hope was we were going to get this campus opened by September of 2005. We weren't sure we were going to do it, but that was our hope for sure. This is me in the library, standing there with my hands in my pockets, April 13th, 2005. The man to my left is one of the architects from Skidmore, Owings Merrill, SOM, the executive architects for the library project. And you can see there's a lot of work left to be done between April and September. Here's the library in June. Here's the library in July. They're still building the interior. The students are going to be there in less than 2 months. Here's the library lantern, the central portion of the library in August, less than a month before the students arrive. And in fact, the lantern, the central part of the library, would not be available for use until after January of 2006. And that meant the first semester, the students could only enter the library through the fire escapes in the east and west wings of the library building. The other academic buildings on campus were not ready on time for the students, so all the camp classes, or at least most of the classes, were held in the library in makeshift classrooms created in library spaces. So it was a really interesting first semester in the library with it doubling as a library and as a classroom space. A very hectic and crazy time. But we did manage to get the campus open. Here's Bruce Miller putting the first book on the shelf in August, less than 2 weeks before the students showed up, or about 2 weeks before the students showed up. Here are the books on the shelves. They were covered in saran wrap because we had lots of visitors coming in and out of the library and we didn't want the books to disappear. When the students started classes on the 5th, they came in and tore down the saran wrap and were able to get at the books. One of the stories that was going around about the campus and the library was that UC Merced was going to open without any books in the library. That was never true. We always planned on books. I think we had 50,000 books on the shelves the day the campus opened, and the number of books has grown, although the electronic collections of the library has always been much, much larger than the book collection. Here are the first students coming onto campus in a ceremony, the bridge crossing that's been repeated every year since 2005. They're being led by a wagon that belonged to Wells Fargo, a major contributor to the campus. And the wagon was pulled by 4 mules. And when the wagon was coming up the bridge, I was standing next to a UC Merced faculty member, and he was looking at the four murals, and he said, "Here come the deans." A bit of academic humor there. I will not name the faculty member, although I think I do remember which faculty member it was. Here's some library folks in their regalia lined up along the bridge. The person in the white shirt is Richard Schwartz. Next to him is Chris Adams, whom I mentioned before. I mentioned Richard before as well, but Chris was the campus architect at this time. And the woman in the yellow dress is Min Jiang Kolb, who was one of the campus architects, worked for Chris. And Min still, as of September 2023, still works for UC Merced. Richard Schwartz no longer works for the university. He retired long ago. And then Chris Adams retired long ago. And I am sad to report that in August of 2023, Chris passed away. A really good dude there. So that was just us on the opening day. But the important point was the campus opened in time for the fall 2005 semester. We got through that first semester. We used baling wire and duct tape to do it, but we made it. We got through it. The campus has gone on to greater glory since then, with ever larger student bodies and more buildings and more accolades coming to it. And as someone who was involved early in helping to create the library and the campus, I'm really proud of having been involved in that. It was a great opportunity. We as librarians got to plan the first research library for the first U.S. research university of the 21st century, and so far, the only new research university in the United States in the 21st century. And we were a very forward-thinking group, and I think we did a lot of stuff right, and I'm really proud of that, and I'm really proud of the success of the campus. And, it was the greatest experience of my professional career to be involved with that. And I know the campus is going to go on to great things, even greater things than it's gone on to, and I'm really, really happy to have been part of that. So that's my idiosyncratic, somewhat biased, maybe not 100% true, but kind of true history of the early days of UC Merced.